Hello and good evening. I'm Elaine Hayes Anthony, Chair of the Department of Journalism and Media Studies here at Jackson State University. Welcome to our 2022 election night coverage. Tonight we'll be providing you with up-to-date information and results regarding the U.S. midterm election. We are live from JSU TV. You can also tune in on WJSU FM, the SIP.FM, and our department YouTube channel. Who will win Mississippi's congressional and judicial seats? Stay tuned to find out. Tonight, we're watching the following races. U.S. House of Representatives, District 1, Democrat Diane Black versus Republican Trent Kelly. U.S. House of Representatives, District 2, Democrat Benny Thompson versus Republican Brian Flowers. U.S. District House of Representatives, District 3, Democrat Shawaski Young versus Republican Michael Guest. U.S. House of Representatives, District 4, Democrat Johnny Dupree, Republican Mike Ezell, and Libertarian Alden Patrick Johnson. Circuit Judge, District 7, 1, Adrian Wooten versus David Lindsay. Circuit Judge, District 7, 2, Deborah Gibbs, Brian Guy, Trent Walker, and Wendy Wilson White. Circuit Court Judge, District 5, 3, Gayla Carpenter Sanders, Demetrius E. Hodges, and Damon R. Stevenson. As election results began to roll in, we'll hear from experts, activists, and political analysts from both sides. But first, let's take a look at voter activity on our campus. Jackson State houses Precinct 49, where students can go and vote. The polls have since closed, but according to JSU's Gabrielle Moore, things got off to a slow start.
At Precinct 49, located on the 3rd floor of Jackson State University Student Center, early morning turnout has traditionally been low, and it continues today for the midterm elections.
I was hoping to have a fairly large turnout here at JSU.
Jean Levine spoke about her role as the Precinct 49 poll manager.
As running this precinct, we, the entire staff, we are charged with ensuring the integrity of the election. Say if someone comes in and they want to vote, but they're not registered in this precinct, we have an affirmative obligation to make sure that anybody that wants to vote in this precinct can vote in this precinct. They will come and see me as the poll manager, the precinct manager, and I will get them to allow them to vote affidavit ballot. The affidavit ballots will go downtown, the commissioners will check it, and for whatever reason they may have been left off of the apparatus that we're working from here, then they will cast that vote for them.
Cameron Mathis, a student from Dallas, Texas, shares his experience being an out-of-state voter for the very first time.
I thought it was going to be a long line because Mississippi does not have early voting, so I thought it would be a long line. But also, I graduated from Prairie View A&M University, so and I was an SGA, so I found out that most students younger than me, they decided to go back home and vote. So when I got here, I was like, okay, maybe all these students register back home too instead of registering here for this precinct. Well, here in Mississippi, I feel like it's important to vote because African Americans seem to go through a little bit more of a hard tribulation than they do from where I'm from, which is Texas and Louisiana. Some of the stuff I've seen here, I'm just like in shock. So I was like, we got to get the right people in the office so we can better, especially this Capitol, because ain't no way this is the Capitol and it's like this. So yeah, that's why I feel like it's important to vote. We got to better ourselves and help better our communities.
Despite the low early morning turnout, those we spoke to have high expectations for a larger crowd in the coming hours with the help of on-campus activities.
I'm not surprised at the turnout just because it's earlier in the morning. I feel like more students will be here in the afternoon because there's more activities going on, and that's the freer time for students to come. But I feel like Jackson State will have a better turnout than the previous years because of the involvement on campus and how engaged students are this year. Today there is a poll watching party that starts at 6 o'clock that is sponsored by JSU Votes and the NAACP and I think the NPHC as well, and also Pi Sigma Alpha's Honor Society and Student Government. They are also having a Souls to the Polls, so getting people to come out and come down here to the JSU precinct and vote, as well as a food truck, and then there is a hot spot today. So we're getting all the students that may be walking past, having free time, making sure they come get their vote in because it does not take long.
I personally vote because I want change. I want to see something different happen. It's a lot of things going on, and I'm just trying to do my part to counteract that.
Are you surprised by the turnout at this precinct right now?
Yeah, I guess so because nobody's here right now. But, you know, I'm hoping there's a huge turnout, the stairs be full and all that. That's what I want to see. So, yeah, I am surprised.
John Lewis, again, I would ask the civil rights and voting rights advocate, fought for our right to die and fought for our rights. And, you know, again, this election is so important, not just for presidential midterm, but if you was concerned about, if you're a woman, you concerned about freedom. Everything, again, that we thought America made progress is on the verge of getting rolling back. And so that's why this election is so important. And not just, but this election particularly is important. It's we're determined. Again, it's over 300 election deniers running for U.S. Congress. You know, again, the balance of power hangs today. You know, we can be, as the young voters, we can be the deciding factor how close would these people get to, again, to the halls of Congress. It's so much important today. Everything, again, everything right now hangs on a balance of young voters today. It's so critical. Bottom line, as Mr. NAACP, I'm doing, and as my organization, the JSU Jackson State chapter of NAACP, that's what we're doing. Talking to people, understand, again, we've been canvassing, we had a 45-day schedule. We've been canvassing, talking to people so they can understand what's at stake. What's at stake.
Reporting for JSU Television, I'm Gabrielle Moore.
Is we better off now?
As the day progressed, more people did show up to cast their ballot in an attempt to increase those numbers. Student organizations such as the NAACP, JSU Votes, the Divine Nine, and the Political Science Department partnered to launch Stroll to the Polls. Let's take a look.
Everybody's coming together to vote. We all trying to make a change. So the change starts with us. So that's what our main goal is, to make this change start with us.
I am the owner of Road Dogs Food Truck, and I'm here to support Stroll to the Polls, which is put on by the Political Science Department, just encouraging our students to know how important voting is. That every vote, absolutely every vote matters. And so I'm here to support and encourage the students to do so.
We're voting today. Make sure y'all come out and vote. I'm here with NAACP. Yeah.
So JSU Votes is just, it's an organization based off Mississippi Votes. What we're doing is we're coming around campus. We're educating the students and our peers on voting. On election day, how important it is to us. So what we're doing here today is we're letting people gather around while we make sure that everybody's voting in the student center today.
I think that it's very vital in this day and time to have activities like these so that our young people can come out and make our voice known. I appreciate the Greek life here that's promoting it, and you know, just getting the word out so that we know that we are here to make a change, and we want our voice to be heard. And I'm loving everything about it, man. You know, it's cool. I'm good with it.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Go out and vote, y'all. Go out and vote.
We applied for a grant through the Southern Poverty Law Center. They invited us to apply for this grant, and the students were actually involved in writing the proposal to receive the grant. And the grant is designed to increase turnout at this particular precinct. Jackson State has a precinct on its campus that the students vote at, and the turnout has been very, very low in past years. So we got this grant for the purpose of trying to increase voter turnout. Now, one of the ways that we thought we might be able to increase voter turnout is to have what we call a party at the polls. And that means that we have food trucks, we have a very celebratory type environment where, you know, students come out, the Greeks come out and they stroll. Ultimately, they're going to do what they call stroll to the poll, where they're going to lead, student leaders are going to lead the rest of the students to the poll to vote. So, you know, we're just trying to get students engaged in the political process, to socialize them that this is what civic engagement looks like, to be a part of the political process. And so that's what we're trying to do to fulfill the requirements of the grant.
Done anything until you voted. November the 8th. Precinct 49, JSU, NAACP, we going to vote, getting the people to vote.
That's right, that's right. You heard them. Vote, though. Students in the 3rd floor, did you vote? Go vote. Yeah, go vote. Exercise your voice.
The reason why I'm involved is because I see that the community needs change, and I feel like it starts with the youth. It starts with us. We could make a change. So with me, I feel like I could do that as well. The turnout we expecting is better than last year. We making baby steps. Of course, we don't believe that. Of course, we don't believe that everybody gonna come out there and vote. But we hope for a change over time. So it gets greater and greater after every year. So we hoping to do better than last year.
But did you vote? Make sure you come out today and vote. Your voice matters.
Everybody come out and vote today. Everybody come out and vote.
Joining us now to discuss the U.S. midterm election is Dr. Maurice Mangum. He's department chair and professor of political science at Jackson State University. Dr. Mangum has more than 20 years of experience as an award-winning professor and administrator, with publications and a research focus on the intersection of identity, race, and public opinion. Dr. Mangum, thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate it. Now let's just kind of dig in now and kind of get right to it. Why are midterm elections important? Normally we come out for presidential elections. Why is this one important to us?
Well, presidential elections are as important as you say they are, because they generate a lot of attention, a lot of interest from everyone across the country. But midterm elections are when the states and the local communities get to focus on themselves. So presidential elections are about national issues. Midterm elections are more about your state and local issues. And so in presidential elections, you have national forces that take place and they preside. The people at the top of the ticket, the presidential candidates, they determine the agenda, they determine the discussion. But when it comes to midterm elections, it's now the folks who are at the top of the ticket at the state level, i.e. your U.S. senators or your governors. They're the ones who kind of dictate what topics are discussed for that particular state. Then when you drill down more to your U.S. congressional races, then you have district issues that are being discussed. So when you have issues that are being discussed at different times over the years, that means different issues are going to be more important. So this year, this midterm election, you have reproductive rights that are more important. Now in 2020, when there was a presidential election, the idea of protecting a woman's right to choose was important, but it wasn't necessarily in jeopardy. Now it's gone. So now it's a different sense of urgency and a different climate, if you will. And so now it's more important for those folks who want to protect a woman's right to choose to actually have turned out to vote to elect senators who will vote for Supreme Court justices who will protect a woman's right to choose. Previously, that may not have been the urgent issue that it was before, because it was just for those who wanted, who are pro-choice, they were really just trying to play defense. Let's just protect. Now they have to play offense because they have to go back and they have to go get that right. So this midterm election is highly important for the people who want women to have the right to choose. But also what's at stake in this particular election more so than anything is our democracy, because you have a number of different states that continue to try to curb the ability to vote for a vast number of citizens. Now, we should be moving in a direction where more people are able to participate, not less. And so when people are able to participate and they do select certain individuals to be their representatives, they may or may not be willing to expand the franchise. So it's important that people vote in every election. So let's back up just a quick second. The Constitution requires that presidential elections take place every 4 years because presidents are elected for 4-year terms. When it comes to the U.S. Senate, they're elected for 6 years. For people in the House of Representatives, they're elected every 2 years. So we have midterm elections where a third of the Senate are up for grabs. So you have about 33% of the Senate up for re-election this time. You have all 435 House members up for re-election because they serve every 2 years. So in 2020, you had a presidential election, you had a third of the Senate up for re-election, and you had all 435 members of the House up for election. So 2-year terms for House members means that they're going to run again in the midterm, but they will not be running with that presidential candidate, and they will not be running with the third of the Senate that ran in 2020. There's a different third, 33% of the Senate that are up for re-election this time. So you have 435 House districts up for grabs every 2 years. Every 2 years, you have a third of the Senate. Every 4 years, you have the presidency. And so when you have staggered terms such as that, you are going to have different forces come into play depending on the election. And so it allows for different types of people to have influence on the outcomes of the election. And so this time, you would expect women to have more of a say in terms of who wins because of the issue of reproductive rights.
Do you expect more women to actually turn out and vote in this election?
Well, yes, in the sense that women typically do vote more often than men, but there should be more women who, you'd expect more women would vote in this midterm election compared to 4 years ago midterm election. So presidential elections are going to yield more turnout than any election. So we can't compare the turnout from this midterm with the most recent presidential election, but we can compare this midterm with the most recent midterm election. And I would expect more women to turn out to vote. At least from what we saw from the summer, when Roe v. Wade was overturned, we saw there was a lot of activism. We saw that there were a little, we'll just say a lot of anger, and a lot of disgust at what the Supreme Court did. And people were expecting Roe v. Wade to be protected because those Supreme Court justices said during their confirmation hearings that they believed that Roe v. Wade, i.e. women's right to choose, was codified law that was to be protected and was precedent. Yet, when they had that opportunity to change it, they did so. So that did anger a lot of people. And so after that, some people said, well, we need to pack the court, meaning add more people to the court to outnumber those people who would be dishonest during their confirmation hearings and then restore some rights. What we've seen from these Supreme Courts in recent years is they've curtailed some rights. Instead of expanding rights, they've taken some away. And so that led more people, not just women this time around, but more people, particularly the LGBTQ plus community, to want to turn out to vote because they see they are next. So women saw that their rights were taken away. The LGBTQ plus community is on alert that they think their rights may be taken away, such as various rights like marriage.
Another thing, you mentioned some initiatives, and you mentioned the women's rights. Are there others like the economy? We've heard that talked about a lot. We've, of course, heard women's rights talked about a lot. And then crime has been a force that we've talked about. Are there any others, or do you think those are the critical ones that come to your mind?
Those are the critical ones because those are new in the sense that we're now thinking about reproductive rights in a different way. But the national economy is always on the docket, always on the agenda. as far as what's a factor for determining who people are going to vote for. Now, it's always the case that the president's party loses seats in the midterm. So given that the president is a Democrat and Joe Biden, it's likely that the Democrats are going to lose seats in the House and the Senate. It's likely. But it's still possible that they can hold control of the House and driver's license to get photo ID so they can go vote. And so voter ID is another way of restricting the vote, especially when we're talking about racial minorities and the poor. And some people consider that a tax and a violation of the poll tax ban, because if I have to do something in order to vote that costs me money, that's considered a tax by some.
Well, I want to ask you just another question, is that you mentioned that some of these races were very, very close. Don't mean to put you on the spot, but when you look at, those states where those races are very close, do you have any predictions that you would be willing to share?
The one prediction I'll be willing to share is that we probably won't know who's going to hold the Senate tonight.
Okay.
In some states, the races are going to be so close, they're going to be too close to call that they may not call them tonight. They may wait a day, possibly even a week. It depends. Again, the Constitution gives states the ability to handle elections. So some states do their elections differently. Some it's digital, some it's write-in, and some, I believe, like Oregon, it's 100% mail-in. And so when you have different ways of voting, you're going to have different ways of counting. Some ways are more efficient or quicker than others. And so we may take some time. But Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, those are states where the Senate races, and Florida, those are states where the Senate races are very close. Those are the ones to keep an eye on.
Well, we here at Jackson State University deal with a lot of young people. Just briefly, what would you say to the young people that we deal with in terms of voting and being proactive, in terms of exercising their citizenship and going out to vote?
I would definitely encourage them to pay attention to the issues and get involved. Get involved in campaigns. Try and encourage your peers to register and vote. Get involved, because what we do know is we know folks my age, we vote. We vote not just because it's a habit, but because we know what's at stake. Our future's at stake. Young people tend not to vote as often as older people. If they want what they want out of the government, they need to change that. They need to start voting and voting often, and not wait for something to happen in broader society that makes them want to protest. They need to make certain that there are people in place and policies that are enacted that benefit them on the front end. Don't be reactionary. Don't react to certain events. Be proactive, get people in power that will prevent the bad from happening. If we don't like it for police officers to get away with murdering our citizens, then we need to elect people who are going to hold the police accountable, and not just do so after the fact, because then there will be no reforms. So it needs to be made that crime is an issue and police reform needs to be an issue before it happens. And they need to stick to it. They need to vote as a block, and they need to be on one page.
Right. Well, thank you so very, very much. Thank you for your insight and telling us where we are now and where we should be going as an electorate. Thank you, Dr. Mangan.
You're welcome.
Okay. All right. So joining us next is Macy Brown, and she is a Mississippi native. She's an activist and organizer and political science major right here at Jackson State University. She currently serves as an advocacy coordinator at the ACLU, and we'll be discussing voting and issues from a student perspective. But first, in a pre-recorded interview with our JMS students, Brown talks about the importance for all voters to participate in elections at all levels.
Well, if you don't vote, I think it's kind of funny when people like vote for president, but they won't vote who the president is at any given moment. And so you have to understand that in order to be really fully a part of the civic engagement process, you have to participate on all levels. And your local officials are the ones making the very critical decisions that affect your day-to-day life. And so I think a lot of people miss that and just think that like, oh, we only have to vote for the federal positions. We only vote for governor, different things like that. But we have to remind ourselves that the people who actually live in the city and the people that we vote for and the people whose faces that we see every day, we see around, are the ones who are making the more important decisions for us every single day.
And I've got more questions. Welcome. We're so happy to have you here with us, Macy, and thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you.
I've heard all kinds of good things about you and what you've been doing, but let's just get right involved. What do you believe is on the minds of some of your peers, the young people, in terms of voting today?
I definitely think, and it's kind of already been addressed, but they'd like to see more action on it in regards to student loan debt relief. I didn't realize going into college, and that's probably me coming from like a privileged standpoint of not having to pay for college at this point, my matriculation, but a lot of my classmates at a very young age have racked up thousands upon thousands of dollars of debt. And so I definitely think that going into this student loan debt was a really, really big issue, and also the crime issue across the country, and especially here in Jackson, has definitely been on the mind for a lot of my classmates.
Okay. In your own words, why are these midterm elections important?
These midterm elections could affect a lot, especially in the Senate here in the United States. In Mississippi, we don't have any of those Senate seats up for election except the election with Congressman Thompson. In a lot of states across the country, there are some really big Senate elections happening and some really big governor elections happening that could affect what type of legislation can be passed for the remainder of President Biden's term, and also kind of putting the steam behind some candidates who are looking towards 2024 presidential elections.
What do you think is at stake in the nation, and of course right here in your home state and mine as well, Mississippi?
Right now we're in a weird spot. It seems like voters are apathetic, but when you look at the numbers, a lot of them are actually showing up. I know just in this most recent midterm elections, I think in 2020, there were only about 1 million early black voters, but this time there are 11 million. And so we see that, okay, we're getting out, we're coming to the polls, but I think that the disconnect happens for so many black voters is when, okay, we've done our part, we're showing up, we're trying to put our effort in, but it doesn't seem like much is changing, especially on a policy standpoint. And so I think that, democracy, as we know it, is at stake, especially if Democrats were to lose the House, and we're already having trouble with legislation coming through. And so I think that, our way of life and the way that our domestic policies will be dealt with is definitely on the line.
Well, one of our students, a JMS student, said the voter turnout at Precinct 49 was a little slow.
Right.
What's the mood like on campus?
That's the part I'm trying to figure out, because the actual people at the polls, that part was slow, and there weren't a lot of people coming out to vote, but there were so many people who were on campus, or people who want to be involved, or try to be engaged in the process. And so I think right now I'm trying to figure out what's the disconnect. I know we have a lot of out-of-state students who stayed registered in their home states and didn't get those absentee ballots back in out in time. And so that's definitely an issue that we're going to have to look forward to in the next couple of years. We have to ensure a lot of students were not registered on campus. They were registered in different counties and cities across the state of Mississippi. And so they didn't get a chance to go home today or send those ballots. And so I think that right now we're definitely going to have to look deeper into how can we, first of all, get students registered on campus so when election day comes, they don't have to find a ride or have family come pick them up to go home. And then how do we
keep them engaged, not just when it's high profile, high stakes election, but for every part of the process.
But I'm glad you brought that up. You're a part of the social media generation.
Yeah.
What part does social media play in all of this, and could it play a larger part toward getting students more engaged, as you just mentioned?
Social media is such a huge part of my life and so many of my peers' lives. So much of the information that we actually get comes from social media. The way that people form their opinions on candidates and issues and what they should care about is formed on what they see talked about on social media. And so I think that, I try to do my part in spreading the information, getting people engaged, but I think that we all have to do our part in because of the audience that we know we have, share relevant information and trying to get, information out there to the people that follow you, because you never know who sees what and how they can disperse that information to other people. And so social media is incredibly impactful.
Well, let's just stay on social media.
Yeah.
Just one more point. If you had to give me 3 top issues that you believe that your peers are really looking at and taking very seriously, what would those 3 issues be in your mind?
I would say most of my friends are women, and so women's rights are extremely important to most of the people who are around me. As we know, women's rights, and specifically I'm speaking on abortion. I think that too many times we dance around abortion like it's a bad word, but we have to talk about it. It's necessary. It's what's happening. People are not going to stop getting abortions because the governor or whoever signs a law here in Mississippi saying you can't get them. And so I think for a lot of young progressive women, abortion is a big issue, and having access to that and being able to have that bodily autonomy, which is supposed to be a human right. Outside of women's and abortion's rights, I would definitely say, even though a lot of people don't think that young people care about the economy, when young people are getting their checks back from work and it's time to go to the store to try to get some groceries, or it's time to go get some gas, and those prices are not the same as they were last week, that's a big problem for a lot of people, and it creates a lot of financial strain, especially for young college students who are not at home. And so I think that, the economy is definitely something that we care about deeply. And then the third issue, again, would have to be crime. I mean, a lot of people who are at Jackson State, some of them come from bigger urban cities, so the whole, crime is not as big of a deal to them. For some people who are not used to there may be a murder every single night during a week, or every other night, or just so many of the issues, people even have on campus of getting their cars burglarized and windows, burst out. I think that that's a big thing of people wondering what can be done about that, what's being done, how can this be addressed in a way that doesn't just involve putting more police or patrol out there, because that hasn't helped either. The crimes have still been happening.
Well, you are also an activist, and you started upon graduating, I believe, from Mora High School. Yeah. You started Black Lives Matter here, and it was a huge, huge outpouring and people getting involved. Why did you do that, and what do you think you accomplished?
So the reason that we kind of organized that Black Lives Matter march in the summer of 2020 was definitely after the murder of George Floyd, and then also seeing a lot of the activity that was happening in other cities across the United States. And so much when these things happen, Mississippi is often left out of the conversation, or what we're doing isn't highlighted the way it is in bigger, more urban, popular cities or states. Mm-hmm. And so we really wanted to make a statement that students in Mississippi, people in Mississippi, despite what you may hear on the national stage, mm-hmm. actually care about what's going on, especially as it pertains to police brutality and different things of that nature. Because oftentimes it's like they look at us as kind of like a monolith of just Mississippi and not so many of the Black or progressive people that live here. And so I definitely think that we helped make that statement, and so much of the pressure that came from others across the state in trying to get that state flag taken down, along with the march, along with the national pressure, it all kind of culminated, I believe, in getting that state flag down. But in Mississippi, we need more than symbolic wins. to really, really make change. And I think that that's kind of where I am growing and what I am seeing more as an organizer is that, yes, those wins are necessary, that pressure is necessary, those statements are necessary, but what can we do to create material change for Mississippians? What can we do? What can we do to get more money in people's pockets? What can we do to make sure more people are insured? What can we do to make sure that more hospitals aren't closing, where a lot of the people that live around those places are either poor, black, both, whatever the case may be. And so I think that that's kind of where I'm evolving, in how I want to be present in what's going on.
Well, does that appear, your activism, does it appear to you to be moving the needle just a bit?
I believe so with amongst my peers. I definitely, especially and when we talk about the water issue, being able to involve so many of my peers, and we delivered thousands of water cases to hundreds of households across Jackson. We're currently working with some partners in different parts of the country to get water filtration systems, inserted and fixed in houses across Jackson at no cost to citizens. And so I think that we're definitely I'm finally getting to that point where I'm like seeing what I'm doing actually impacting people in their long-term, lives. And so I'm glad I kind of got to that point, and I'm able to help my peers be involved and be a part of that change that they like to see as well.
Well, you mentioned the water situation, and in doing your research as a student, also, have you seen where you believe young people could provide some source of leadership in terms of maybe even arriving at some meaningful solutions?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that we are, and I think that, some people in leadership are, doing what they can to an extent, but I definitely think that it's going to take some young people with some new ways about going things, and more innovative strategies, definitely more collaboration from partners from around the country and even some around the globe who see the issue and want to help. So I definitely think it's going to take some young people across Jackson and Mississippi to be a part of the change that we want to see, and bring that new energy and bring those strategies, and just give people something new, because obviously what we're doing now, I mean, it's helping a little bit, but I mean, the strategy has to change, the collaboration has to change. Some people in leadership, it has to change. It's not working. So I would love to see young people be a part of kind of moving that needle so we don't lose our capital city. So Mississippi doesn't, we can't lose that.
Well, we're in the middle of the midterms.
Yeah.
What would be your recommendation to lawmakers that win their elections? What would your recommendation be to them as they embark on their either incumbency or new lawmakers that are coming to the table? What would you want them to do or to know from a young person's point of view?
I definitely think that one thing that I think young people are disconnected with politics is that we don't feel as if politicians are very visible or very human-like. To us, it seems like they kind of sit at the top, they make their decisions, they don't really consult with the people, and they, rub shoulders with whoever, rub elbows, go on about their day. And so I definitely think to anybody that's returning to a position or in a new position is prioritize making those person-to-person connections, with the people on the ground, not just during an election season. So many people you only see when it's time to start voting again. You never see them during the entire time in office, or you never hear about them on social media advocating for change or trying to help any sort of initiative or doing any sort of volunteer work until it's around time for election year. They're going to need your votes, and they're going to want you to donate some money to their campaign. And so I definitely believe that politicians have to remain visible. You have to stay on the ground. You have to actually be in the community that they're supposed to be impacting and figure out what they want. And until that happens, I think there's always going to be sort of a disconnect between the people and the government that's supposed to be serving them.
And how do they go about that? How do they find out what people really want?
I mean, the same way that they find out what the, what the people who are I don't know, most important, or the other leaders or whatever around them. It seems to me as if they kind of prioritize what the people around them want versus what the people across their city or across their district or across their state actually want. And so, I mean, they have the staff, they have the resources, they have the money to send folks door to door. They have the money to send out the surveys. They have the money to send out. I mean, there's so much that can even be done virtually and digitally now. So I don't really buy the excuse. Just with the way of how fast we can get information dispersed into, like, in real time. Like, I could see election numbers coming in on the couch scrolling on my phone. I don't think that there's any excuse as to, you can't say, well, I can't tell you what 3 million people want. Yes, you can. It could take you like 24 hours with the right developer. And so just in 2022, that's just not an excuse anymore, especially with the evolution of technology and how fast it changes.
Well, listening to you, it looks like we have a politician on the horizon here. Thank you so much. We appreciate you joining us.
All right, that's an understatement. I think that, you know, in Mississippi, I think I heard Dr. Ori talk about this at one point. You know, they come to school here, they get their education, all that happens, and then after that, it's time to go. Oh. I mean, and you know, we have a place where so many people are uninsured, don't have access to it. When hospitals are closing, when if you're a woman, you can't get an abortion. When you have your governor saying he'd like to be anywhere else but the capital city. That's not very attractive to young progressive people that actually stay here and want to build their families here. And so I definitely think that there's a brain drain happening, and if something doesn't change, we're going to lose, you know.
Affecting us more than the older generation now.
Being black, we are underestimated by our education and intellectual thought, so I believe that we should all vote.
If you want to see change in Mississippi, it's just important to vote. So if you want change, it'll be at least you try it. I'm a registered voter. I think it's really important to vote to get your voice heard.
A lot of people in the African American community feels as if their vote doesn't matter, or they feel as if they're still going to be in office. When I say they, I mean people that we don't want in the office. But if everybody votes, then we might get some people that can help us.
As a student, I feel like voting is really important. A lot of people our age, or students in general, they are nervous about voting because they don't have a lot of political efficacy or a lot of information on politics or what happens around us, you know, because a lot of times they urge us here at Jackson State to vote, go to your centers and vote, your stations. And they say that because even if you're not from here, the environment that you're in, just because you go to school here does not mean that the laws and regulations here don't affect you and also the constituents of Jackson, Mississippi, or Mississippi as a whole.
It's important to vote because voting is what guides the systems that control our lives every day. So if a person doesn't vote, they're literally saying they don't care about what happens to them on a daily basis.
How do you think your vote affects change?
I think my vote affects change very much, although I'm just one person. But I feel like if everyone comes out and votes in the right manner, then you can see a massive change.
I think voting in midterm elections are important. Yeah, you know, especially right now, you know, with the overturn of Roe versus Wade, I feel like you got to be some change in office, especially turn up at the polls this year. And yeah, most definitely.
If you don't vote, you can't see a change in your state, in your country, or even in your city. It's more than just the president that you vote on, and you complain about things that are going on like in the surrounding area, but if you're not voting, you can't make a change, you can't see a change.
Gentlemen, I'm so pleased to have with me Dr. DeAndre Ori, who is Professor of Political Science right here at Jackson State University, and also the former chairman of the Republican Party for the state of Mississippi, Joe Nassif. Joe, Dr. Ori, thank you both for joining us. We really appreciate it. Before we get into questions, let's get an update, and we are just getting some numbers in. For District 1, we have Trent Kelly with about 75.8% of the vote, and Diane Black with 24.2%. What's your reaction?
I mean, there's nothing surprising here. You're going to have very polarized outcomes. I mean, Republican districts are Republican districts. I mean, a majority Republican, and the Democratic district is overwhelmingly majority black, which is equivalent to a proxy for Democrats. So you're going to have very polarized outcomes. They're not going to be any close contest as relates to the Republican and Democratic outcomes of these congressional races.
Okay. Yeah.
I think we got the surprises out of the way in the first run of the elections when Michael Guest got less votes than his opponent, who had only been in Mississippi 1 year. So I think after that, as Dr. Ori was saying, I don't think there's going to be, once the dust settles, we have some early numbers now, but once the dust settles, I think it's going to come out like we expect it to come out.
All right. And
yeah, most excitement was in the primaries, of course. You know,
yeah.
Rizzo losing, and so when it comes to the general election, though, there's not much new understanding
Okay.
here.
And that's about what you're saying here, because Michael Guest is at about 51% right now.
That's going to increase tremendously.
Tremendously.
Yeah.
And Young is at 48.8%.
Yeah, that's limited number of precincts in by now.
District 2, we've got 60%, which is about 1,500 votes, and Brian Flowers is at 39.8%. That'll hold. You think that'll hold? Okay.
If not more.
District 4, we're going back to what you said, Joe, about Mike Azale. That's at about 62.6% of the vote. And then Johnny Dupree is the one coming up next with 34.4% of the vote.
You know, I haven't seen any of the poll. I mean, I expect Mike Ezell to win that race, but Johnny Dupree is certainly no pushover. He's no newcomer. I mean, he's run for he's Hattiesburg for a long time, so he's no first timer. So it'll be interesting to see what the final numbers are in that race. But whatever they are, they won't be, because Mike Ezell is running against a big pushover or anything.
I mean, that's a highly Republican district.
That's right.
We won't expect Dupree to do very well in that district. Of course, he has run for offices previously.
It tells us that for the next 2 years, are we going to have stalemate and basically probably not get anything done? Or are we going to have 2 years similar to the last 2 years? I mean, if the Democrats were somehow able to keep control of the House and the Senate, and obviously they're going to have the presidency for 2 more years, I think you'd have similar type. I just think they're going to be, whether you call it politics or whether you call it policy, I don't think there's going to get much done if over the next 2 years. I think it's we've already had people announcing their campaign or announcing that they're going to announce their campaigns for president, and so I think that there's not.
Yeah, so not racist, but racially conservative. So to your point as it relates to Barack Obama, my point is that in those areas where there are high concentration of blacks, this is where you see the most racial conservatism. So if you look at the South didn't support Barack Obama. South overwhelmingly Republican, and as the percentage of blacks increase in those areas in the South, this is where you find the greatest opposition to Barack Obama. As it relates to voter ID.
And Joe Biden, right?
And Biden, yeah. Democrats almost aligned along racial lines. So like if you look at the state legislature in Mississippi, it's black, Republicans are white, save for maybe 3 legislators that are white in the Democratic Party. But as it relates to voter ID, the statistics show that blacks are less likely to have an official ID relative to their white counterparts. I'll give you a quick example. Right here in West Jackson, where the Metro Center is, this is where we had a DMV office, Department of Motor Vehicle, where you get your driver's license. Well, they closed that office. So that means that people who may not be mobile cannot get a driver's license or an ID unless they go miles from here. Now, an elitist would suggest that, hey, anyone should have an ID and anyone should be able to get to one. But when you take into consideration poverty, which is highly correlated with race in this state, then that becomes a problem as it relates to voter ID.
I think if there weren't 17 things you could have, I would agree with that. But let me say one thing about the legislature you mentioned. you know, the legislature has changed, in my opinion, for the good, because now it is highly polarized from a Republican versus Democrat standpoint. But for years, what was it? It was white versus black. That's what you know. For years, it didn't matter if I mean, it was all Democratic, but it was just the white Democrats versus the black Democrats. To me, I would rather have it split among party lines and people talking about policy than split among simply racial lines. Now, I'm not saying it's fixed and it's perfect, but I'm just saying that you know it's more. It's more progressive in a general sense than it used to be, for sure.
Well, there was more coalescing years ago when they were Democrats. When blacks and whites were Democrats, there was more coalescing along racial lines. For example, education reform. We got education reform because we had William Winter and we had Robert Clark. Robert Clark is African American, William Winter was white. They actually came together to actually create this education reform policy. And that's when blacks and whites were in the same party.
Yeah, but you could use that same argument now, and I could go through a list of what Republicans have passed in the last 10 years as well, since we've had a majority. It might not be policies that you like.
No, but how much was coalescing between the races, blacks and whites collaborating together?
Well, the reason the blacks and whites were collaborating together in the era you're talking about is because for that short period of time, they were all Democrats. I mean that's just my opinion, but you know, we could talk about this forever.
Forever. Well, let's go on another issue. A lot is at stake here in terms of Congress tonight, and we need to look at what will the next 2 years look like. And if one party loses the House, if another party loses the Senate, what are we going to look at like as a nation?
Well, one thing we have to look at is the economy. I mean, you cannot ignore the economy and where the economy is. So the question is, who do you blame? So the Democrats would suggest that, hey, this is just natural in terms of the way that the economy works. You got Ukraine, you got the supply chain problem, you got COVID-19, but then Republicans would say that it's, you know, big spenders. You know, you got the infrastructure bill, you got a lot of money that was spent there. So depending on who, you know, can control the House and possibly the House and Senate, I don't know whether or not, now that I've looked at some of the numbers, I don't know if the Republicans will capture the Senate as I anticipated before. But that could have a serious impact on, you know, how the economy moves from this point. Naturally, it can't get anything but better, we hope. But it just depends on, you know, what policies are incorporated. I mean, you talked earlier about the deficit and, you know, the deficit being exacerbated. Yeah. But Biden suggesting that he actually improved with the deficit. But it just depends on the different policies that are presented.
Yeah, you know, to me, I think if you left it up to Mitch McConnell and Joe Biden, they could probably get some things done, to be honest. You know, I mean, they worked together for years in the Senate. They may not have always been on the same page about things, but I think they could probably cut some deals, as they say. But I think that if you end up with Kevin McCarthy as Speaker of the House, and some of the leadership that he's mentioned as leadership, if that's the case, I think it's you know, going to be a lot of investigations, and I think there's going to be a lot of things like that, and I hope that's not the case. You know, Governor Barber used to say, you know, good politics makes, good policy makes good politics, and you know, I think the reverse is true as well, and I hate to see us go down that road.
Okay, I want to talk a little bit about the messaging, because both of you all have touched on that. What do you think about this high stakes messaging, and is it going to be helpful to the electorate or not?
When we say high stakes messaging, Dr. Anthony, what do you mean just kind of the way the parties maybe target a group of people, or what do you mean?
Overall, target a group of people or talk about a group of people. Messaging is very important in 2022.
It is,
and if it's done a certain way, it has a certain effect. What do you think this messaging that we're witnessing today, what effect has it had on us?
I think I think it's never good lying to people, and I think when you give people the impression by telling them that an election was stolen, they don't believe their vote means anything, and it's already hard enough to get people to vote as it is. I think I probably told Dr. Anthony this through the years, but when I ran for office, I would see somebody, a friend of mine, and I was young, much younger than my opponent, and they would say, "Voted for you today," or "I'm going to vote for you tomorrow," and I would know they weren't registered. But there was nothing that I could do about that, unless it was 33 days ahead of time. I could try my best to make a comment that wouldn't make them mad, But my point is, it's hard enough to get people to vote, but when you convince people that elections are fixed, and I mean, I've just got to point this out. You got to give me 2 seconds to point this out. Sure. The company sued for defamation that was accused of fixing the election. Okay, I couldn't think of the name of it, and I wouldn't say the name of it even if I could. One of the defenses of the lady that was sued for defamation was that no right-minded person would have believed any of what was said, and that because of that, there was no damages, because no right-minded person would have believed the allegations. Now that's pretty bad, and I think we at least owe it to the voters when we're doing messaging that if we want to, really go at it hard on a tough issue like abortion. I understand that. A lot of times where you stand on a situation like that is where you sit, but I think we can do it, but I think we need to start telling the truth. Somebody asked me if I'd ever get back into politics the other day, and I told them I would if I could do it, tell the truth, and be successful.
You don't want to be a politician then again,
That's a long no, isn't it?
No, so in terms of candidate appeals, or campaign appeals rather, I study race and politics, I study Southern politics. And so you can't talk about, campaign appeals without talking about like the Southern strategy. And the Southern strategy was adopted, 1964, 1968. When Barry Goldwater ran for president, he said, "I'm going to go hunting where the ducks are." And what he meant was he was going to go get white voters, and they were located in these deep South states. Those were the only states he won, save for Arizona, his home state. So he did win Mississippi, South Carolina, and I think Louisiana maybe. But the approach here was to use innuendos that did not specifically touch on race, but were framed around race. So you have phrases like law and order. At that time, you had the uprisings that had taken place in places like Los Angeles in 1964, 65, 66. And law and order was what suburbanites were looking for. They didn't want these uprisings to spill over into their communities. And so you had law and order. Over the years, welfare has been racialized to the point that it is actually considered to be a black issue. Mm-hmm. Now, the reason that's problematic here in Mississippi is because you have all these poor whites who tend to vote across the board. Now, we can come back to that in terms of voting across the board based on class, when you got hospitals closing. I think in Greenwood, if UMMC does not work closely with Greenwood Floyd Hospital, it's going to close. You got these hospitals that are closing, and it's because
Our hometown has the same issue.
Clarksdale? Yeah, so you got folks who are voting against their self-interest, and I can't say voting against their self-interest because I don't know religion actually may be higher on their poll than economics. But the Southern strategy is something that has impacted Mississippi and across the South, and the elites in the Republican Party have done an excellent job of messaging. They've been able to actually maintain a base of voters, even though in some instances it may not work to the advantage of those who are voting for that particular party.
Well, let's just kind of turn the table just a little bit toward the economy. How focused are Republicans and Democrats on the economy? And, you know, how do you get that across, or do you think they're getting across quite well?
Everybody's feeling it. I mean, everybody's feeling it. From gas to food prices, so on and so forth. I guess the issue is, in terms of voting patterns, the electorate is so polarized that, Democrats are going to vote Democrat, Republicans are going to vote Republican. And so some Democrats may actually vote, in this case, against self-interest as it relates to the economy. If the economy is doing bad and folks are blaming the party in power in terms of voting, blaming the president and the Senate, then, you might expect them to vote across the aisles. But in this particular case, the electorate is so polarized that you're going to get Democrats voting Democrat, Republicans voting Republican.
But look at 94 real quick and 96. You had Bill Clinton get drummed in 94 in the lost the House and the Senate for the first time in 40 years, lost 36 governor's races. And then 2 years after that, what happened? He got reelected because people had plenty of money in there, relatively.
He moved to the right also.
That's right. He moved to the right on some issues, but the economy was doing well in addition to some of the issues that he compromised on that maybe some people weren't happy about now. But he I guess my point is, I think a lot of people, I asked somebody when they knew Bob Dole was going to lose, was it a year before? Was it a month before the election? They said, no, it was a year before, because they knew that people, the economy was going to be at a stage where they didn't really care about Bill Clinton and Al Gore in terms of politics. They were voting their pocketbook more. Yeah. And we started this morning, watching those TV shows in the morning saying that might happen again. And then when we were sitting in there getting ready to come in here, it looked like maybe that wasn't going to happen again. Yeah. So I don't know, I don't know where it stands right now.
I had only one simple response to that, and that's what James Carville said in 1996. It's the economy stupid.
That's right. He was right.
That's all he said, and he was right on point.
He was right.
No need to try and understand all of the, what happened in the election.
That's why they didn't have him on TV this year.
Well, tell me this, what's your take on the voter turnout? I haven't heard our Secretary of State tell us exactly, what his prediction was. What are some of your predictions?
It's hard to say about Mississippi specifically, but if you look at the nation as a whole, as it relates to early voting, about 41 million ballots have been cast in early voting in 47 states. About 1 million in some of these key states like Pennsylvania rather, Michigan, and then in Georgia, there were 2 million ballots cast in the early voting.
It was generally up, right?
Yeah, it was. Yeah. And African Americans actually were up in Georgia as well. Mm-hmm. So I want to come back to Georgia because that's really an interesting state to be watching right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Arizona as well.
It is.
Mm-hmm. All right. So regionally, what races are you watching? Those that we just talked about, or are there others?
Well,
did we say Pennsylvania?
Pennsylvania, for sure.
Well, we talked about Pennsylvania. We were talking about this. I had in my notes, I actually prepared for once. But I was watching a TV show, and they were talking about watching one of the states. I believe it was North Carolina districts, and they named 3 districts. And they gave a district that if the Republicans won one district, you knew it was going to be a Republican landslide. If they only won the second district, it was going to be a good night for Republicans, but no landslide. And if they didn't win anything but the first district, the lowest numbered district it just happened to be, that they weren't going to do that well. And so before we came in here, they had ruled out the tsunami slide. District. So, as far as voter turnout nationally and what I'm watching, that was what I was watching coming in, that and Georgia. But we didn't get, both Georgia races were not what I thought, expected them to be, but it was really early.
Well, I want to get your take on this. According to the Associated Press, as of 8:13 p.m., Republicans have the majority with 68 seats to 35 seats in the House. In the Senate, it's pretty close. Republicans are taking 40 seats and Democrats 39.
In the House, I'm not surprised. I think what's going to be interesting is what's going to happen in the Senate. And, we were talking about regionally what races to watch. You got in the Senate, you got over in Georgia, you have Walker and Warnock, and you have Stacey Abrams running in the gubernatorial seat. Now, that seat is neck and neck. But on that same ticket, you have Warnock and you have Walker, and it seems as though folk are actually voting for governor, Republicans that is, are voting for governor and not voting for the Senate seat. So normally what they would do is on the top of the ticket, you vote, and then you get voter fatigue and you stop voting. But in this particular case, they're not voting for the first race, which is a Senate race, and then they're going down and voting for the governor's race. And so you have a disparity in terms of, what the outcome looked like in the governor's race and what it looks like in the Senate. Now there's another Senate race over in North Carolina that I'm really interested in seeing the outcome, and that's a woman by the name of Beasley, who was a Supreme Court justice, and she was out front before we came back, but of course that's extremely early. It's actually become neck and neck now, but that's going to be interesting to see. I think 538 had her down by 3% or losing by approximately 3%, but depending on where those ballots are left now, she was actually running neck and neck.
To me, if you ask me what the most interesting one, and I hadn't seen anything feedback, is the governor of New York. If you had obviously an interim governor that took over after what's his name, Cuomo resigned, and then is getting challenged by a Republican for governor of New York, which is, I don't know, I can't remember. I actually can't remember. Maybe Ed Koch, I don't know. Maybe he was a Democrat, I guess. But maybe I'm wrong about that. But it was very close from a polling standpoint as far as the governor of New York. I think what'll probably happen is it'll come down to the end, and the Democrat incumbent will hold the seat. But it just seemed interesting. It is an interesting race to me that it's even close at all.
But staying in the Northeast, of course, we got to talk about Pennsylvania.
Oh, you've got to.
So Pennsylvania, you got Fetterman and Oz, and I thought that Fetterman was done after the debate. I thought that he shouldn't have debated, and the way that I perceived it was that his illness appeared, or people would perceive it as a weakness. Now, some suggested the opposite, that they were sympathetic towards him, but I think those are Democratic voters that were going to support him anyway. But in terms of those who were independents or leaning, I think that they saw that as a weakness. Now, I don't know how that's going to turn out. That's one that, I don't know. I actually thought that Walker was going to do better than what he's doing now, and I don't know what the numbers are looking like now. But I thought Warnick had an opportunity to knock him out in the debate, and he didn't. And Herschel Walker remained in that race, basically running on opposition to Joe Biden and the economy. So, yeah, Pennsylvania for sure.
Well, and going back to Pennsylvania, Oprah Winfrey came out for, and a little late, but she came out. How do you think that Oprah Winfrey effect is going to affect that race?
I don't know, but I can tell you how Dr. Oz thinks. Did you see his response? He said, "I love Oprah, and I can't wait to see her again." I mean, the point is, he knew he wasn't going to say anything bad about Oprah Winfrey. I think if Oprah Winfrey endorses your opponent, you just take your lumps and keep going. I don't think you attack Oprah or anything like that unless you want to really lose even worse. But that's
I don't know if it'll have an impact. I mean, you speaking of endorsements, I think locally, these endorsements matter. We look at the Jackson Advocate, and we can get into those judicial races later. But Jackson Advocate did endorse some women candidates, and I don't know if it was Women for Progress, but one of those women organizations actually endorsed 3 women on the judicial races. And I think that matters.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Joe? Do you think that matters?
Endorsements and that
local
situation.
races.
Oh, I absolutely do. But I think at the end of the day, it comes down to the candidate and who people are most comfortable with. And I can speak for myself. I ran against an incumbent Republican primary who had been in there 16 years. And I had everybody but, my mailman endorsing me, But it just got to the point where, again, a lady told me, she said, "I voted for your opponent for 16 years. If you win, I'll be happy to vote for you." And I said, "Well, I guess that's fair." But so I think sometimes it didn't really matter to her, who had endorsed me. But if it would have been, somebody maybe a little fancier, I think it just depends. Although I know that's not a good answer. I think
no, but so you make me think about like these nonpartisan races, and they're not very salient.
They do matter.
And what I also want to get from you as a strategist, do signs matter? So name recognition is clearly a variable that plays a role in the outcome of an election. And you had races like, for example, I think it's Circuit Court 7-1 with Adrienne Wooten running. She has signs all over this city.
Yeah.
And no one knows what that particular judgeship does. It's a nonpartisan, so they don't vote along the lines of party. And so you end up having to make your decision based, in my opinion, on what you see.
But there was a lawsuit that went to the Mississippi Supreme Court that said that parties could endorse in nonpartisan judicial races. So we always made it a point to, in races, because we knew people, they have a hard time knowing who, everybody wants to know who to vote, who to vote. They always, people like us who are involved in politics, you start getting asked as you get closer to the time period, who should I vote for? But in these nonpartisan judicial races, we, meaning the party, used to always vote as a party to endorse certain people, because that would kind of be a signal to our people that we felt like they, represented the same viewpoints on issues that we did. And it would tell them. Otherwise, they really might not know who anybody is. As far as signs, boy, if signs could vote, I'd be in the legislature right now. I think they do help, but I think at the end of the day, they're a necessary cost, but I don't think they make the difference in that.
But in low salient races, like these judicial races.
I think anything in those races that helps somebody's name ID absolutely is a big deal.
And then here's another one. So in Circuit Court Seat 7-2, so Sub-District 2, you got Gibbs, you got Trent Walker, and you got White. Gibbs is the first candidate on the ballot. How much does that impact when you don't have any information about these candidates? And, you know, CX has a lot more signs as well. But in terms of name recognition and placing it on the ballot, just placing it on the ballot means anything when you don't know anything about these candidates.
I think it does. I've known Trent Walker for a long time. He's a friend of mine. Sorry about that. I hope that doesn't do him. I hope that's not bad. Hurt him in the election. But I think in a race like that, because I think people don't like to skip races. I think they'd rather go ahead and check a mark. And you know, the most intuitive thing to do really is just check the first person. So I think people joke about that a lot, but I think you're absolutely right that does matter.
Well, which congressional race or candidate kind of more so when you look at the two? Which one stands out a little bit more to you?
We're going to give the same answer. So
In this state?
I just mean the Ezell beating an incumbent congressman.
Yeah.
I don't mean favorite, you know, one or like his policies. I just mean the fact that after all these years that Ezell in a big group of people was able to beat a sitting congressman. To me, that's the most, you know, one of the most interesting things. I think the other ones we figured we knew what was going to happen, but I think that one was surprising and interesting.
No, I totally agree. Palazzo getting beat in the primary, I didn't expect that to happen. As a Republican strategist, I'm sure you may have had some insight on that, but I didn't see it coming because incumbents typically win. Name recognition, they got money, they got, you know, different perks that put them in a position to win. And in this particular case, you know, you get a sheriff that comes in there and the showdown at the OK Corral, he came out on top.
Well, let me just say, this seems like you guys are right on the same page of what's actually going on. Even though it's still early to call, Circuit Court District 7-2 race, Deborah Gibbs is in the lead, just as you both stated here a few moments ago. In the Circuit Court District 7-1 race, Adrian Wooten is in the lead with 65% of the vote. So you guys have even mentioned that, just kind of giving an opinion of where you think things are in these judicial races.
Yeah. I mean, you know, Adrian Wooten's former state legislator.
That's right.
She was an incumbent, and you know, the person that she ran against just didn't have the name recognition. And he didn't have the signs to give him name recognition.
Yeah.
But I mean, you saw Adrian all across his city.
She was a favorite.
Yeah.
Well, tell me this, when you look at the midterm elections, what is the biggest issue facing Mississippians today?
When we look at the midterm elections, I guess we're talking about politics. We're not talking about the biggest issue facing Jackson, or the biggest issue facing, you know, certain areas of the state. I think from a political standpoint, as a Republican, I would like to get back to where we stand for something, for a list of agenda items again, specifically, like when Newt Gingrich had the contract with America. People may have hated, or they may have disliked Newt Gingrich. They may have disliked the contract with America, but it was a list of items that he said, if we get elected, we're going to get in there and do. Lately, we've been more focused on a personality than a party. And I'm ready for us to get to where we have things that we stand for, and that we did an autopsy on our party, and one of the things it told us was we needed to do a better job on outreach, whether it was African American voters, whether it was Hispanic voters, whatever the case may be. And we worked on it for a couple of years, and then when the party kind of reconfigured itself in the 2015-16 range, it kind of went away. And so I think from a Republican Party, selfishly, from a Republican Party standpoint, I'd like for us to get back to where, and I think the current governor, I certainly don't speak for him, I think the current governor is a policy-oriented person as well, and that he is not going to get up and say something that's not true if he doesn't believe it, and that he's going to continue. He just, he's had one thing after another to deal with, as a lot of public servants have. So anyway, that's my comment on that.
Well, I mean, when you look at a place like Jackson, I have to, say this as relates to the midterm and the direction that Congress will go. Infrastructure was a part of Biden's, package, and Jackson was supposed to benefit from the infrastructure allocation. The state clearly has not been supportive of allocating funds beyond what the federal government is going to allocate. And so, depending on whether or not the Republicans take control, they may not be able to tap into the federal government for more support. They just got some federal government money recently, and it's going to be interesting to see.
And that's for water.
For water, the infrastructure, yes. Because you're talking about pipes that are dated to the point that you can't salvage or insulate them. I mean, they're corroded. And so you would have to literally come in and almost take each of those pipes out. But you're going to need financial support. And they were able to get that financial support, or will hopefully get that financial support from the federal government. And that would hurt them if the Republicans took over the House. Then I guess there's not a well to go back to. But I think that, infrastructure is extremely important for this state. And the federal government has actually been supportive of Jackson.
You think so?
I think so. I think regardless of what happens, there's not going to be a choice.
Okay. All right. Mississippi has made national news, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what you just talked about the water situation. The crisis here in the capital city, and what do you believe caused us to get this far into a crisis, and how do you see it getting better?
Well, I mean, some people suggest that we've kicked the can down the road. I don't necessarily know if that's true. When I listen to some of these former mayors, they do actually suggest, or they state the type of plans that they had in place and the efforts that they made to try and address this water issue. I think Harvey Johnson made the most compelling argument as it relates to the water issue, and he was suggesting that, hey, when you got flight out of Jackson, I mean black and white flight, when you got working class and middle class flight outside of Jackson, then the city becomes poorer and you can't generate revenue. And so when you have problems with the billing cycle, then people can't pay their bills, or simply will not pay on a bill that high. And so now you're not getting any revenue. And so that's a problem, and that problem is associated with poverty. Poverty is, according to Harvey Johnson, the greatest or the most important variable as it relates to the condition of the water crisis here in Jackson now.
I'm just going to say the same thing. It's a sad way to say it, but I heard a lady politician, I can't.
He highlighted was that we spend all this money on these students here in the state, and they take their talents elsewhere. So we actually invest in these students, but then they end up leaving the state because, I mean, in many instances, there's simply not enough opportunities. I mean, if you get a degree in an area where there's no industry.
Right, it's not necessarily selfish.
Right, opportunity.
Yeah.
And then a lot of folk, I mean, myself, I left the state. I left the state for a different reason. I left the state because of the flag, but I returned. You know, so I'm hoping that these folks will leave and be able to come back. You know, they can come back on their own terms and possibly be in positions where they can actually, you know, be employed, self-employed maybe.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, it's something that, you know, that we need to consider because our young people matter. They really do. And of course, we'd like to see them come on back. Yes.
Well, I mean to interject, but it just came top of my head. So on top of my head, I've been looking at some numbers, and 40% of children in this, 40% of black children in this state are in poverty. So when you look at what the future looks like for Mississippi, and that becomes generational poverty, then, you know, it doesn't look good. And so, you know, that's one of the reasons, you know, folks are leaving here because, you know, the economy, but that's something that we're gonna really have to really look at is poverty here in the state.
And 40% is a high
That's an
percentage.
extremely high number.
It is. And what do we do? I mean, we can do it again if they're able to be promoted professionally. We can't hold people back, but it is a problem for our state.
Well,
if they live in Clarksdale and have to drive 2 hours to go to the hospital, you know, it's hard to selfishly ask them to do that, but they can still stay in Mississippi.
Yeah.
They just don't have to live in the Delta.
Yeah, so if you look at, I mean, like again, I do work on race and politics, and if you look at the Mississippi Delta and, you know, where the plantations were during slavery, and then if you look at from Highway 49 coming out of Greenwood, Mississippi, going to Clarksdale, if you travel that road 49 up to the crossroads, you're not gonna find any grocery store. There's no economic development. And so when you go back and you look at where the plantations were and, you know, the blacks that remained there was never any economic development. I say that to say that, you know, when the state actually rejects Medicaid expansion, these could be considered liberal policies, but when you frame it along those lines, that there was generational poverty, and it actually goes back to that root, then now some of these policies that are perceived to be liberal are simply policies that have never addressed or were never in place to address the poverty that actually was residual, going back to slavery, really.
Well, we're at November now. Let's fast forward to January. And what happens in January? The Mississippi legislature comes back to town. What do you think should be the priorities for the legislature in 23?
Well, if we can speak honestly, when I thought about that question, what's the legislature going to get done in an election year? The first word that came to my mind was nothing, just because, you know, I'm joking around a little bit, but you know, legislature is not historically been inclined to do big things like, let's just say, Medicaid expansion or Medicaid reform, you know, in an election year, but maybe do it the next year if they were going to do it. So 2023, I would think, is going to be a tough year in the legislature for some things to get done. But maybe I'm just an old cynical guy. Well, maybe that's the case.
What do you think, Dr. Ward?
I think they're going to have to, at some point, they're going to have to focus on these hospitals, these rural hospitals, because folk don't have mobility. I mean, they're not mobile. And so it's difficult for them to go from when Belzoni's hospital closed and they had to go to Greenwood. Now Greenwood is closed. That means they have to come to Jackson.
Don't have access to care.
They don't have access to care, so health care.
And that's very important. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this evening. That's all the time we have for tonight. But thank you. We definitely believe